Welcome to Leadership Devotionals. For today, we will continue with the principle of Apostle Paul's leadership, and this will be the third installment. And we will be dealing with this time the leader's identity. In the last episode, I mentioned to you about 1 Corinthians 9:19 to 23. And we will expound on that a little bit later. But here in this part, you will get to realize that Christian leaders engage in a reformulation. Notice this, reformulation of their personal identity. Now, scholars know that the text that I have mentioned a while ago, 1 Corinthians 9:19 to 23, forms a chiasm. A chiasm is from one part, has a mirror in the other part, and it goes something like that. And I will break that down to you. This means the parallel section of the structure of the verse that Paul wrote corresponds to emphasize his message, the message that he's trying to convey. Like A in the first line is equals to A dash here in the bottom line. And it tells us that Paul's leadership and service strategy are framed by his slave or servant self-understanding. And another part of the line, the second part of the line, tells us that Paul saw himself through a new identity understanding. This time, a new identity of who he is. So let us read the text, how Paul wrote it. He said, okay, notice this. This is the first line of the text. He said, I made myself a slave to all in order that I might win the more. Okay? I made myself a slave to all in order that I might win the more. That is in verse 19. The counterpart of that is one here below, way below, in verse 22b. It says, I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. So you notice that. He became a slave to all in order that he will win more for the gospel. And in the last line of verse 22, he said, I have become all things to men. In the first part, I have been a slave to all. That's still all. I have become all things to all men. And his message says that I might by all means save some. In the first part, the counterpart is that I might win the more. Now let's go to the second part of the chiasm. He said, I became to the Jews a Jew in order that I might win Jews. Here, the counterpart below, and you can find that in the first part of verse 22, says, to the weak I became weak that I might win the weak. So the first part here, he became a Jew so that he will win the Jews. In the second part, he said, in the counterpart below, in the parallel below, he said, to the weak I became weak that I might win the weak. And so in the center of the chiasm, the two statements here says, to those who are under the law, I became as one who is also under the law, to win those who are under the law. That is the second part of verse 20. And the counterpart of that is just beside it. He says, to those who are without law, meaning to say those outside the law, as without law, that I might win those who are without law. So, you can see here that this text has a message for Paul's identity. I made myself a slave to all. He sacrificed the first identity that he had. He sacrificed that first identity so that he now this time connects his identity with Christ. He became a servant to Christ. He became a servant to all. Okay? A slave to all, so that he will win the more for Christ. As I've said in our last episode, leaders make sacrifices. And the sacrifices that leaders make are there for the cause of the mission, for the cause or for the mission that they undertake in either the organization or the mission that God will entrust to them. So Paul opened verse 19 by asserting that to the Jews, he became a Jew. So the question here is, how can Paul take this stance? The answer, of course, is that in the immediate context, Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, had the difficult task of working among multiple cultures. You will notice there that he is to those in the law and to those outside of the law and to those who are weak. He was working in multiple cultures. But he takes up his task because he is bound to Jesus Christ. Now, Paul is free to serve the Corinthians, the people of Corinth, because he has not accepted any compensation from them. He claimed this and he wrote this in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 15. Further, because he is free, he is free what to do himself. He chose, the beauty there is he chose to enslave himself to people in need of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. He tied himself to the mission that Jesus has given him. And you can read that in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 19. At minimum, Paul is free because of his encounter with Jesus Christ. And that is in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 1. Thus, he is released from the old identity anchors that he was once embraced. His freedom is grounded this time in a new experience in Christ. He affirms, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Oh, this is beautiful. He wrote this in his second letter to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Paul was a Jew, of course, we know that. He declared that in Romans 11 verse 1 to 2. He said, I am an Israelite, I am of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Therefore, when Paul says, to the Jew I became a Jew, Paul is saying that he has experienced a reformulation of his base identity. Remember, he is now a new creation. He is a new creature with a new identity. The convert Paul, the former persecutor who loved Judaism enough to kill to protect it, now refuses to be enslaved to the identity politics of either his time or his culture of origin. Paul is now free in Christ. And having experienced that freedom in Christ, his identity is now attached or engaged in Christ. At Damascus, Paul received an identity transplant. We know that when he met Jesus Christ in the road to Damascus. The transforming encounter with the risen Christ deconstructed, notice that, deconstructed his inherent identity and replaced it with a new one, this one, an identity identified with Christ. Paul became a new creature in Jesus Christ. And so, fellow leaders, you can see here that the beauty of servant leadership is little by little unraveling in the life of Paul. He used to be a persecutor of Judaism. Now, he said to the Jew, I became a Jew. How can he say that when he is a Jew, really himself? But he is saying that because he is not just only a Jew. He is a new kind of Jew. He is a new kind of Jew that he is already a believer in Jesus Christ. In fact, he said, if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, you are of the seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. And so, he is already promoting that new kind of identity. An identity that is enslaved to the mission. An identity that is attached to the purpose. It's no longer about himself. It's no longer about his ego. It's no longer about his pride. He has emptied himself of that. And this time, his only focus is on the mission that Jesus Christ has given him. That is the true essence of servant leadership. We empty ourselves of all that we think about us, and we attach ourselves to the just cause or to the mission. And because we have attached ourselves to that, we serve the people that are under us. We serve the people that are in our charge. That is servant leadership. And Paul is slowly unraveling this concept in his life. Remember, doulos before has a bad connotation. But little by little, the concept of a slave or the concept of a servant has been elevated in the life of Paul. And now we can see that when we see people being servant leaders, there's a certain level of dignity in it. Because Paul has been an example to us. New perceptions of the world, new perceptions of society. He has new priorities, new ambitions, and new criteria of perception. All this and more constituted a reformulation of Paul's formal self-understanding and identity. Fellow leaders, look at your own self. Check your own. And identify yourself with the mission. Identify yourself with the just cause that you are. And if you're a Christian leader, identify yourself with Christ in your leadership journey. That is my prayer for you. Hello, fellow leaders. If you have been blessed with the devotional that you have just heard, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe. Because when you do that, more people, more leaders will be blessed with the same blessing that you have experienced. In YouTube channel, click subscribe to Good Shepherd Consultants. God bless you.